Hello, this is John Hulsman, and welcome to my latest vlog for España. This is a very interesting one because we're looking at Biden's foreign policy in the Middle East. And whereas if you look at the Indo-Pacific policy, though the Biden people would rather be dead than admit it, they've built on the Trump policy, recognizing China as a superpower peer competitor, realizing they have to marshal that, leaving the trade sanctions in place as Trump had. There's an awful lot of commonality with the Trump position. On matters relating to the Middle East, it's been a very different policy, a dramatic break, but a dramatic break to the past. For such a supposedly progressive group of people, and for people who on domestic policy surely are highly ambitious and highly progressive, the Middle Eastern policy is basically reactionary. What you have are two theories of the case. You have Barack Obama's theory of the case, which is what Biden is hearkening back to, which is that it begins the Trump and Biden theories in the same place. It begins with the notion that the Middle East has been the graveyard of American presidents now for two generations almost, and that the reality is we have to do better, that the Middle East is an area of decreasing strategic interest to the United States. Given the shale revolution, we're no longer dependent for oil on the Middle East. So there's that. There's the fact that promiscuous interventions such as occurred in Afghanistan and Iraq no longer make sense in the Middle East. And that the name of the game is the Indo-Pacific, where all the risk and all the reward, much of the future growth of the world and peer competitors, peer superpower competitor China sit, are all lodged in that region. And so pivoting to that region from both sides makes sense. Working from that basic starting point, they reach totally different conclusions, unlike in the Indo-Pacific. Here, the Barack Obama policy, which Biden is hearkening back to, is the United States can leave the region largely, be an offshore balancer, but only if it brings Iran in from the cold. Both sides would say there are basically five great powers in the Middle East, within the region. There's Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey, and Israel. Those five. And of the five, they all have to be brought in, according to the Obama team, into a concert of powers where they establish a balance of power on their own that is self-regulating, and that America only intervenes when this self-regulation goes away. But the only way this rather elegant theory works is if Iran no longer is persona non grata in the region. And that's how you get the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, which is the nuclear deal between the United States and the West and Iran. And the deal doesn't say Iran will never get nuclear weapons, but it kicks the can down the road, says there'll be a relaxation of sanctions, and if Iran allows UN inspections and does not try to break out for some sort of nuclear weapon or nuclear breakthrough, the United States will see to that. And the bet was that over a period of time, Iran would moderate its behavior, and the hope was that then it wouldn't try to achieve nuclear weapon capacity at all over this period of time, and the whole thing would somehow magically work out. But Iran would be brought in from the cold through JCPOA, and the United States could then turn its attention to what really mattered, which was China and the Indo-Pacific. And that was the basis for the Iranian nuclear deal, really the cornerstone success at the time of the Obama administration. Well, so far so good until Donald Trump came along with a totally competing theory of the case. He says JCPOA isn't working, you're just humoring and appeasing a bunch of people who want to dominate the region. It isn't the United States that's making Iran a revolutionary power. They want to be a revolutionary power. That's their domestic politics since the Iranian Revolution in 1979. And to pretend otherwise is a fool's errand, and you're merely appeasing people who want through regional adventurism to dominate the region. The Trump people would point to the proxies, the Shia proxies the Iranians have in Yemen, in Iraq, in Lebanon, and in Syria, that this Shia crescent was leading to Iran beyond the march, and that to reward enemies on the march was a bad idea indeed. Rather, accept the balance of power within the region and build up old traditional allies like Saudi Arabia and Israel. Put all your chips with them, ostracize the Iranians, and that this would keep the peace because the burgeoning Israeli Saudi alliance and the Abraham Accords that occurred are a part of this when the Saudis winked and allowed the UAE, Sudan, Morocco to join with Israel, an unprecedented deal that isn't given nearly enough space. That the Saudis allowing for this to happening and winking this through is the step to allow the U.S. to take a step back and only intervene if Iran tries to break out of the straitjacket. So Iran is really the pivotal difference in both cases. To use John Le Carre terminology, Obama and then Biden want to bring Iran in from the cold, and the Trump people want to see that it stays awfully, awfully frigid in Tehran, and you want to strengthen the Israelis and the Saudis to keep Iran in that straitjacket and allow them to not advance in the region. And without Iranian adventurism, you can then turn your gaze to the Indo-Pacific, which is where it's at. And so these entirely differing theories of the case have to some extent both been disproven by history, by time, by things moving on. And now with Biden back, you see the failure yet again of the Obama policy because things haven't stayed still. As Thomas Wolfe, the great novelist, said, you can never go home again. Going back to that time becomes problematic. What is Iran to do to rejoin the JCPOA? Trump got the United States out of it. The Iranians predictably then weren't cowed as Trump might have hoped, but then they tried to break out of the nuclear straitjacket they're in. They're enriching to a much higher percent, 20% at all. They're spinning their centrifuges. They have a lot of nuclear material, more than they're supposed to, and everybody nervously looks the other way, hoping Israel won't draw the conclusion and attack them. At the same time that this hasn't worked, the Trump approach, well, neither has the Obama approach. Now putting the Iranians back into a straitjacket with JCPOA, what would the sunset clause be? We're already far down the line. Most of the sunset clauses of JCPOA ran out in 2025, 2030. That isn't a lot of time for the Iranians to drastically moderate their behavior, which was always the bet the Obama people made, that the unspoken bet that they never talked about. But the bet was that Iran would moderate its behavior between 2025 and 2030. And there's no evidence whatever that that's happening. Rather, the reverse. The Iranians have just elected an Ibrahim Raisi, the most hardline administration for running the country in a day-to-day way, as the Iranian president does, in memory. And so they've become more hardline. There isn't a single moderate in any position of power in the Iranian parliament, dominated by hardliners, the presidency dominated by Raisi, who was a hardliner, known as the hangman of Tehran. He was a prosecutor in the Iranian revolutionary period, personally involved in seeing large numbers of people sent off to the gallows. This is like saying that Saint-Just was a moderate in the French Revolution. Simply doesn't pass the laugh test. And then, of course, the supreme leader, Grand Ayatollah Khomeini, is far from a moderate. So that doesn't work for the Biden plan whatsoever. Secondly, everybody's getting nervous about this. The Israeli government, the Bennett government, was very makeshift. It was primarily designed to get rid of Bibi Netanyahu, but it's proven to be rather durable. And over Iran, everyone agrees. From Benny Gantz, the defense minister, through Yair Lapid, the man who set the thing up in the first place, through to Bennett. They all agree that Iran needs watching and that if the United States doesn't get Iran to rejoin JCPOA, that they will draw the appropriate steps. And the Americans have kind of mumbled that might be okay without really meaning it. But then Iran itself is a fly in the ointment because it no longer wants to join JCPOA. Why should it? It's used to living with onerous American sanctions, with the rising price of oil, with the Chinese not caring about these terms, but illicitly, but overtly, taking more and more Iranian oil, and there's a strategic deal now, diplomatically, between Beijing and Tehran. They have an outlet for their oil, they have oil prices rising, and they show no inclination whatever, to budge. And so going back to the future doesn't work because the future moves on. As the great American lyricist Johnny Mercer put it, something's got to give. Stay tuned, and thanks.